They've been in my life for most of my life.
Robert De Niro is one of Hollywood's best talents, with performances that stand out among the finest in cinematic history. From one blockbuster to another, his name has become synonymous with greatness, intensity, and an almost unmatched dedication to his craft. But at 82, the legendary actor has done something that has left the entire Hollywood talking. He has finally revealed the 6 actors he considers his absolute favorites of all time. For a man who has worked with nearly every kind of performer, from rising stars to seasoned stars, this revelation isn't just another list. It's a window into De Niro's soul as an artist. Who inspired him? Who earned his respect on and off the screen? And who does he believe represents the very best of what acting can be?
No, he was right thinking that way. It was perfect. I mean, to do it that way, these guys.
De Niro has always been a man of few words, notoriously private and selective in what he shares. So when he speaks this candidly about his personal favorites, the world listens. His choices will surprise some, inspire others, and maybe even spark debates across generations of movie lovers. So, who made it onto Robert De Niro's exclusive list? Which actors does a legend like him look up to, admire, and even measure himself against? Stay tuned, because the answers are as fascinating as De Niro's own career. Number 1. James Dean.
Clocked at around about 106, 7.
De Niro starts by naming James Dean as his number 1 favorite actor because he was Dean's fanboy even as a child, long before De Niro became a 2-time Oscar winner. Before Taxi Driver and Raging Bull, before he became one of the most respected actors in history, he was just a young boy in New York watching Dean's performances with wide-eyed wonder. In Dean, he didn't just see an actor. He saw a raw, unfiltered soul expressing emotions that others were too afraid to show. De Niro has often explained that when he first saw James Dean on screen in East of Eden, 1955, it was like watching someone break the rules of acting in real time. Dean wasn't polished. He wasn't rehearsed in the old Hollywood way. He was messy, unpredictable, and deeply human. For a young De Niro, who was already feeling like an outsider, Dean's vulnerability was a revelation. "He made me want to act," De Niro once admitted. He wasn't performing, he was living. You felt everything with him. You didn't watch James Dean, you experienced him. That sense of authenticity struck De Niro so powerfully that he began to see acting not just as entertainment, but as a calling. As a child, De Niro collected posters of James Dean, watched his films repeatedly, and even studied the way Dean walked, talked, and carried himself. His friends would tease him for mimicking Dean's brooding expressions or slouched posture. But for De Niro, it was more than imitation. It was admiration. He wasn't just copying an actor. He was absorbing an energy that would later define his own performances. Dean's premature death at 24 left De Niro devastated. Like millions of fans worldwide, he felt robbed of what could have been a monumental career. But while others mourned, De Niro transformed that grief into fuel. He promised himself that if Dean's life was cut short, he would honor him by carrying that same intensity into his own work. Another reason Dean became De Niro's lifelong favorite was his approach to acting. Dean was heavily influenced by the teachings of Lee Strasberg and the method acting movement, a technique that emphasized deep emotional truth and personal connection to characters. De Niro, too, is known to immerse himself in method acting, pushing his body and mind to extremes to bring characters to life. From gaining weight for Raging Bull to driving taxis for Taxi Driver, De Niro mirrored Dean's philosophy. The role comes first, comfort comes last.
Finally, I thought about it more, and that's what I did.
He has admitted that watching Dean blur the line between actor and character gave him the courage to embrace that same radical dedication. To De Niro, Dean wasn't just an actor. He was a mirror of the human condition. In Rebel Without a Cause, Dean embodied the confusion, anger, and longing of youth in a way that felt timeless. De Niro often said that Dean didn't just play a character. He was that character, carrying his own pain into the role. That emotional honesty resonated with De Niro as a young man navigating his own insecurities. Dean gave him permission to be imperfect, to explore pain, and to express emotions society often told men to bury. He showed us that being vulnerable was powerful. De Niro once reflected, even decades into his career, with shelves of awards and countless iconic roles, De Niro still pointed back to Dean as the original spark. For him, James Dean wasn't just a favorite actor, he was the beginning of everything. Without Dean, there might never have been De Niro the actor. He shared that Dean's brief but blazing career inspired a generation of actors, and gratitude that one boy from New York saw himself in that troubled, passionate young man on screen. Even at 82, De Niro speaks of Dean with the same reverence he felt as a child. Time, fame, and success haven't dulled that admiration. If anything, they've sharpened it. Because when De Niro looks back on his own career, the sacrifices, the transformations, the legendary performances, he knows where it all began. It all began with James Dean, the actor who lived fast, died young, and left behind a legacy strong enough to ignite the fire in him. Number 2, Marlon Brando.
Is sacrosanct, and you're ruining our fantasy with the intrusion of a little reality.
For De Niro, Brando was not just another actor, but a force that shook Hollywood to its very foundation. The man who taught an entire generation that acting was not about reciting lines, but about living truth on screen. As a young boy, one of the actors that captivated De Niro was Brando in films like A Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront. Brando moved with a raw energy that felt unpredictable yet authentic. It was as if the camera wasn't watching an actor, but a man caught in his most vulnerable and unfiltered state. For De Niro, those moments became a turning point. He realized that acting could be more than performance. It could be transformation, honesty, and power. This discovery set the foundation for De Niro's own artistic journey. Brando embodied the method approach to acting, a discipline that demanded complete immersion into a character's psyche.
As an actor, sometimes what would upset you is if someone does a part.
De Niro saw this in the way Brando carried himself as Terry Malloy in On the Waterfront, a washed-up boxer whose pain seemed to seep from every glance and gesture. That performance was like a masterclass to De Niro, who began to understand that great acting was not about projecting emotion, but about inhabiting it so deeply that audiences could not tell where the actor ended and the character began. The connection between Brando and De Niro reached its most profound point with The Godfather saga. In 1972, Brando's portrayal of Don Vito Corleone became a piece of cinematic immortality. Just 2 years later, De Niro was handed the daunting task of playing the same man, only younger, in The Godfather Part 2. To step into Brando's shadow was terrifying, yet it became one of the most important moments of De Niro's career. His dedication to studying Brando's every nuance paid off when he won the Academy Award for the role. For De Niro, it wasn't just recognition, it was an affirmation that Brando had been his teacher, even from afar. He once said that playing Vito Corleone felt like stepping into Brando's world, and in a way, it was his tribute to the man who had made him want to act. But here's what De Niro admired most about Brando: his fearlessness. Brando did not play it safe, and he refused to conform to Hollywood's traditions. In films like Last Tango in Paris or even The Godfather, he exposed raw humanity in ways that made audiences uncomfortable yet mesmerized. This courage to risk everything for the sake of truth resonated with De Niro. It gave him the freedom to take on roles that were unconventional, dark, and psychologically demanding. Characters like Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver or Jake LaMotta in Raging Bull bore the fingerprints of Brando's influence on men who were not heroic, not polished, but brutally real. Of course, Brando was also a complicated figure. He was known for clashing with directors, resisting the Hollywood system, and at times sabotaging his own opportunities. Many viewed this as arrogance or instability, but De Niro saw integrity. To him, Brando was never interested in fame or approval. He was interested in truth. He was a rebel who refused to let Hollywood dictate who he was, and that rebellious spirit made him even more magnetic. De Niro related to this deeply, preferring throughout his own career to avoid the spotlight unless his work demanded it. Even years later, when De Niro himself became a legend, he never hesitated to point back to Brando as the origin of it all. For him, James Dean may have lit the spark of passion when he was a child, but Brando was the one who showed him the path, the craft, and the discipline required to be great. Without Brando, there would be no De Niro as we know him. When asked to explain why Brando still stands at the top of his list of favorite actors, De Niro would always say one thing: Brando made acting feel alive. Number 3, Meryl Streep.
Yes, I have a lot of that.
When De Niro talks about Streep, there's always a kind of admiration that feels personal, almost like one artist recognizing another who has managed to master the impossible. For De Niro, Streep is an embodiment of versatility in its purest form. He has often said that many actors, even great ones, tend to carve out a certain type and stay within those lines. But Streep seemed to ignore those boundaries from the very beginning of her career. One day, she could be the tormented Sophie in Sophie's Choice, delivering a performance so devastating that it left audiences in silence. The next, she could transform into a ruthless fashion mogul in The Devil Wears Prada, commanding every frame with wit, control, and an almost chilling sense of power.
Getting stuck with a role, and then you're always known in that role.
He once explained that watching her work felt like witnessing someone slip into another human being's soul with ease. as though she carried an endless library of lives inside her. They worked together on films like Falling in Love and Marvin's Room, and it was in those moments that De Niro realized just how extraordinary she was. He recalled how Streep would show up on set without ego, without pretense, but with a preparation so meticulous that it raised the level of everyone around her. He noticed how she listened, not just to lines, but to energy, to silences, to the unspoken emotions in a scene. Acting with her was like playing jazz with a master musician. She gave you room to improvise, but she also demanded that you rise to her standard. For De Niro, that kind of generosity is what separates the good from the truly great. Another reason Streep stands out for De Niro is her longevity. Hollywood is notorious for discarding women after a certain age, treating them as if their worth declines with every passing year. Yet Streep defied this cruel cycle. Not only did she remain relevant, she dominated, delivering career-defining performances well into her 50s, 60s, and beyond. To him, Streep's continued success is proof that real talent is timeless. And then there's Streep's humility. Despite holding more Oscar nominations than any other actor in history, despite being regarded as a living legend, she has never carried herself with arrogance. On set, she is often the one asking questions, trying to understand her character more deeply, or even laughing at herself when things go wrong. De Niro finds this heartwarming. In an industry filled with egos, Streep on set and off set remains one of his best actors. Number 4. Richard Harris.
Ducking this and that, I dashed in. I had to make my entrance just before him. As I hit the stage,
De Niro recalls first being struck by Harris in the 1963 classic This Sporting Life, a performance that tore through the screen with raw power. Harris played Frank Mation, a coal miner turned rugby player, with such intensity that it earned him an Academy Award nomination and cemented his place in cinematic history. For De Niro, watching Harris in that role was like witnessing the pure essence of method acting, not polished, not pretty, but brutally real. He often points to that performance as one of the reasons he became obsessed with truth in acting, the same truth he would later pursue in his own roles. But Harris wasn't just about grit. De Niro admired his range, the way he could transition from rugged, working-class characters to roles filled with poetry and elegance. Films like Camelot showcased Harris's ability to be commanding yet vulnerable, to inhabit grandeur without losing humanity. De Niro always admired actors who refused to be boxed in, and Harris embodied that principle. One moment he was a king, the next he was a bruised and broken man. And in both, he was utterly convincing.
For 5-6 months working, blah, blah. And so then
What also drew De Niro to Harris was his rebellious spirit. Hollywood often prefers actors who play by the rules, who smile for cameras and nod politely in interviews. Harris was never that man. He drank too much, spoke his mind freely, and lived in a way that was often self-destructive. But beneath that chaos, De Niro saw honesty. Harris wasn't pretending to be someone he wasn't. He lived his life as unapologetically as he played his characters. And that kind of fearlessness was something De Niro respected, even envied. Later generations came to know Harris as Albus Dumbledore in the first 2 Harry Potter films, but De Niro always emphasized that Harris was far more than that iconic role. To De Niro, Harris's legacy wasn't about one part, but about a career built on intensity, courage, and unpredictability. He has often said that Harris brought danger to the screen, the sense that you never knew exactly what he was going to do next. That, for De Niro, was the mark of a true actor, someone who kept both the audience and his fellow performers on edge, leaning forward, waiting for the next move. In naming Richard Harris among his favorites, De Niro was honoring not just the performances, but the spirit behind them. Harris was flawed, complex, and brilliant, and it was precisely those contradictions that made him unforgettable. For De Niro, who built his own career on diving into the complexities of human nature, Harris was absolutely great. Number 5. Harvey Keitel.
I met my wife in Rome at a party for Robert.
The relationship between De Niro and Keitel is almost like that of soulmates, one cherished by both actors. Their bond goes back decades, to a time when both were young men trying to carve out a space for themselves in an unforgiving industry. They didn't just cross paths, they grew together, pushing each other, inspiring one another, and proving that sometimes the most enduring artistic partnerships are born out of shared struggle. De Niro recalled how their connection began on the streets of New York, long before fame. Both were drawn to acting for the same reason, not for glamour, but for truth. When they came together in Mean Streets in 1973, their chemistry was undeniable. Keitel's character Charlie, trying to balance morality and loyalty, clashed and intertwined with De Niro's reckless Johnny Boy in a way that felt electric. For De Niro, that film wasn't just a breakthrough. It was the start of a lifelong bond with Keitel, a fellow traveler who understood the raw, unpolished energy of New York storytelling. What made Keitel special in De Niro's eyes was his authenticity. Keitel was never afraid to play men who were messy, conflicted, and often unlikable. He brought a quiet intensity to the screen, the kind of presence that didn't need grand gestures to command attention. De Niro admired that because it mirrored his own approach. Both men relied on subtlety, detail, and the ability to make silence as powerful as dialogue. Acting alongside Keitel felt, for De Niro, like a conversation between equals, a rare balance of energy where neither tried to outshine the other. De Niro also admires Keitel's loyalty. Hollywood can be a brutal place, filled with fleeting friendships and shallow alliances, but Keitel was someone who stood by people he believed in.
Well, one thing is it's harder to get a job.
When De Niro struggled early in his career, Keitel was the one who helped get his projects off the ground, even putting his own reputation on the line to back him. That kind of loyalty resonated with De Niro, who valued relationships built on trust and integrity rather than convenience. In Keitel, he saw not just a colleague, but a brother in arms who shared his values. Number 6. Dustin Hoffman.
For allowing those of us who have admired you for so long to gather.
When De Niro reflects on Dustin Hoffman, his reasons for naming him as one of his favorite actors of all time go deeper than the usual talk of craft and transformation. One of the things De Niro often points out is Hoffman's fearlessness in being difficult. On set, Hoffman was notorious for clashing with directors, questioning choices, and refusing to settle for anything he didn't believe in. Many actors would shy away from that kind of reputation, afraid it might cost them work, but Hoffman leaned into it. To De Niro, that was unexpected and admirable, not arrogance, but a refusal to compromise. Hoffman was willing to be uncomfortable, even unlikable in real life, if it meant the work stayed honest. De Niro respected that because he knew just how rare it was in a business built on keeping people happy. Another reason De Niro values Hoffman is because of his vulnerability off-screen. While Hoffman played tough or eccentric characters, he often admitted to feeling insecure, to doubting himself before every performance. For De Niro, who is famously quiet and guarded, seeing Hoffman speak so openly about fear was refreshing. It showed that greatness doesn't come from being fearless, but from using fear as fuel. De Niro has said that Hoffman turned self-doubt into an engine, pushing himself into places most actors wouldn't dare go. That honesty about weakness struck a chord with him. It made Hoffman human, not just a legend. Besides that, De Niro also reveres Hoffman's unpredictability. On camera, you could never fully anticipate what Hoffman would do. In Midnight Cowboy, when he slammed his hand on a car hood and shouted, "I'm walking here," it wasn't in the script, it was Hoffman reacting in the moment. De Niro loved that because it showed Hoffman's instincts were alive, untamed, and real. It reminded him that the best moments in cinema aren't planned, but lived. That kind of spontaneity, that willingness to trust chaos, was something De Niro valued and often sought in his own work. But here's what's even more striking. De Niro cherishes Hoffman because of how he elevated others.
We as actors don't do it all alone. We can't do it alone.
De Niro has often said that acting is a dialogue, not a monologue. Hoffman had a way of pulling more out of his co-stars by giving everything to a scene. In Kramer vs. Kramer, his intense clashes with Meryl Streep weren't rehearsed politeness. They were raw exchanges that forced both actors to dig deeper. De Niro, who treasures collaboration, admired how Hoffman made his partners better simply by being relentless. In naming his 6 favorite actors, De Niro wasn't just honoring performances. He was acknowledging those who embodied contradictions, difficult but generous, insecure but bold, unpredictable yet precise. These are what makes them unforgettable. Let's know your thoughts in the comments section. Subscribe to this channel for more videos like this, like and share.